on, give me a break. You're not exactly a top dog over there at the key, now are you? Sending me your rook to handle a job this risky is a goddamn insult.
Is this supposed to be some new form of Findom where you pay $100 to get humiliated by NPCs in a video game? Starfield is one of those games where the more I play it, the less I like it. 20 hours into the game, it felt like an 8 or 9 out of 10 for me. 50 hours in, I was down to a 7. And now that I've spent over 100 hours adventuring in Todd Howard's spacefaring magnum opus, I've come to the painful realization that Starfield is the most mid game Bethesda has ever created. And one of the biggest reasons for this is that Bethesda hasn't adapted their game design or overall formula for over a decade, which leads to Starfield feeling outdated compared to other RPGs in recent memory. In this video, I'm going to critique the combat, companions, open world design, quest presentation, and more in Starfield to show just how much Bethesda has fallen off since their glory days. So buckle up, grab some iced coffee, and let's dive into the gameplay of Starfield. One of the biggest reasons I'm drawn to science fiction is the seemingly endless possibilities for creative expression, particularly when it comes to technology that doesn't exist in the real world. Sci-fi authors and game developers can introduce us to new things that simply aren't believable in other genres. I'm talking about futuristic weaponry, faster-than-light space travel, and even intelligent alien races or new cultures. And unlike their previous games, Starfield has the benefit of being a completely new IP, which doesn't have to adhere to the creative constraints and pre-established lore of existing franchises like Fallout. Bethesda had an opportunity to create basically anything they wanted with this title. So what did they come up with when it came to the guns? Basic pistols, basic rifles, basic automatic weapons, and basic shotguns. Despite being set 300 years in the future, most of the guns in Starfield have equivalents in the present day. And the ones that don't exist in 2023, the laser and particle beam weapons, were basically just copied straight from an earlier Bethesda title, Fallout 4. Let's compare this to other science fiction games. The Outer Worlds has a ray gun that allows you to shrink enemies down into basically nothing. Mass Effect has a whole host of interesting new weapons like the Cane and the Geth Spitfire. Even Fallout, a game set in a post-nuclear apocalypse, has more interesting weaponry than Starfield, like the Fat Man, a gun which launches mini-nuclear bombs to eviscerate your foes. But in Starfield, all we get are basic bitch weapons. To me, this displays a complete lack of imagination and creativity when it comes to making a brand new spacefaring universe. And this lack of creativity bleeds into other areas of the game as well. Video games and fictional media in general aren't created in a vacuum, so there's always going to be some inspiration from other games that already exist. But let's just say Bethesda borrowed a lot of things from other franchises, including their own. For example, how do the people of the settled systems refer to illegal drugs? What's the street lingo? They call them chems. This is exactly what people call drugs in Fallout, and I'm pretty sure that terminology originated in Fallout. I've certainly never heard it anywhere else. And let's talk about the opening of the game, where we interact with an alien artifact and experience a vision when we touch it. Where have I seen this before?
Shepard! No, don't touch it! Too dangerous!
There's also a quest where we discover an unhinged AI that was eerily reminiscent of a mission from Mass Effect Andromeda. But I digress. There's way more I want to say about the combat. Beyond the complete lack of imagination in weapon design, there's also barely any variety in each of the main weapon categories. I decided to go with a laser weapons build, since these were the most sci-fi feeling guns in the game. But this ended up being a huge mistake, because there are only 3 laser weapons in the entire game: the Equinox, the Orion, and the Solstice pistol. The Equinox and Orion are functionally the same gun. They're both laser rifles with a similar fire rate, except the Orion does more damage. So if you want to make a laser rifle build, there is really only one gun in the entire game you'll be using. Starfield also has particle beam weapons, but these require skill point investment in a separate category. And there aren't that many particle beam weapons either. I only counted 3 distinct lethal particle beam guns. Starfield makes it seem like there's lots of different weapons by changing the name of the gun, but the only difference between different versions of these weapons are the attachments and passive stats. Starfield also has a distinct lack of uniques. Even the uniquely named weapons you receive as loot or quest rewards are just reskins of other base versions. For instance, the Short Circuit pistol is just another version of the basic Solstice, and Jasper Crix's legendary Revenant rifle is just a reskin of the basic Magshear rifle. And once you actually get into combat, things don't get much better. The enemies are absolute bullet sponges that take multiple clips to kill with automatic weapons. The only difficulty is remembering to buy enough ammo before you start a mission, because the brain-dead enemy AI certainly is never going to pose a threat to you. Also, companions and other allies still do that annoying thing where they run directly in front of you while you're firing your gun. This happened a lot with Fallout 4 companions, and it's still a problem in Starfield 8 years later. So at the end of the day, after 7+ years of development, we basically got Fallout 4 combat and Fallout 4 weapons in a space environment. I can't say I'm surprised because my expectations for Starfield were incredibly low after the reveal last summer, but I'm still disappointed in the lack of innovation with the game's combat.
Sarah Morgan, Chair of Constellation. That means anything you discussed with Barrett is my business.
Starfield also has a big problem with their companions. Many RPGs provide us with a wide range of squad mates to help us along on our adventures. Over the years, studios have copied the BioWare blueprint by creating, or at least attempting to create, characters with rich backstories, unique personal missions, and even the option to form romantic relationships. Assuming the writing is halfway decent, most RPGs of this style will provide us with 6 to 12 companions with complex backstories, diverse opinions, and distinct personalities. But when compared to squad mates from other major RPGs, Starfield's companions fall short in a number of ways. For starters, there are only 4 mainline companions in Starfield: Sarah Morgan, Sam Coe, Barrett, and Andreja. This is much less than most of the other big RPGs from the last 15 years, including Fallout 4, which had 13 unique permanent companions, excluding the DLC characters. Starfield does allow you to recruit additional crew members to serve on your ship and outposts, and you can even bring them along for combat just like the Big Four. But come on, we all know that the crew members are not on the same level as the full companions. They have less skills, less backstory, they don't have their own missions, they don't chime in with dialogue during the quests, and obviously there's no romance either. They are just basically filler characters. I'd much rather play an RPG with 6 or 8 well-developed companions than one with 30+ half-assed, half-baked NPC squad mates. To make matters worse, there is absolutely no diversity amongst the 4 main companions either. And I don't mean racial or gender diversity, I'm talking about diversity of viewpoints. When it comes to hearing their thoughts on major decisions that you'll face in Starfield, you might as well just talk to one companion because they all say the same thing. And I don't simply mean they all want you to pick the good guy options, although there is a distinct lack of evil companions too, which I'll touch on shortly. What I mean is all 4 companions share literally the exact same opinion on every major quest decision in the game. Whenever you complete any of the major faction quests, you'll be prompted to speak to all of your companions so they can say their piece on what just occurred. Here are a couple of examples of these post-mission chats to show you the wide range of opinions you will see.
Where terramorphs are concerned, I do not believe there is a way to remove risk from the equation. Perhaps an experimental microbe has its own risks, but what of the risks to who knows how many human lives until the Asylees can do its job?
I only wish that the United Colonies chose to exterminate the terramorphs with the experimental microbe instead of choosing this ridiculous Asylee solution. Apparently, their decision was based on your recommendation. That was a risky choice you've made.
So, you really think the Asylees are going to work out, huh? You must have seen some data that I didn't.
I don't know about these Asylees.
That microbe would wipe out the Terramorphs for good, it's certain. I mean, the Asylees? It'll take longer, take more hand-holding, and there's no saying the Asylees will fully get the job done. I hope for all our sake you made the right call.
But I'm glad you put a stop to that neuroamp tech. Nothing good was going to come from that.
That's why I'm happy you were around to step in and place Ryujin on the right path. After all, based on your recommendation, they've ceased their work on that disturbing neuroamp technology.
Mechs, xeno-warfare, and now this neuroamp tech. Swear it's the worst yet. Thank God you put a stop to it.
I think it is perhaps for the best that the research program will come to an end. Where that neuroamp technology could lead, there are many bad outcomes. Too many.
These are just a couple of examples, but I could easily make a whole video compilation about this, so let's speedrun the other decisions. All companions oppose making Ularu Chen the CEO of Ryujin. They all support siding with UC Sysdef against the Crimson Fleet. They all oppose cutting a deal with Ron Hope, although Sam was somewhat conflicted about Hope's impact on society. They all support the destruction of the Lazarus plant. Seriously, just pick any major quest decision in this game, and every companion shares the exact same opinion. On top of this, Starfield doesn't provide us with any evil or even morally gray companions. We're given the option to join the Crimson Fleet pirates and roleplay as a bad guy, looting, killing, and taking whatever we want from the galaxy. But why don't we get a pirate companion? In fact, why don't we get companions from any of the major factions? Fallout 4 gave us one companion for each major faction in the game. Preston from the Minutemen, Paladin Dance from the Brotherhood of Steel, Deacon from the Railroad, and X688 from the Institute. Starfield has 5 major factions we can join, but we don't get a full-fledged companion from any of them. Sure, we can recruit crew members from some, like Mathis or Hadrian, but we've already discussed why this isn't the same as having a full companion. Well, maybe Bethesda was just taking a quality over quantity approach with the companions, so they must at least be well-written and interesting characters, right? No, they're not. These are some of the most milquetoast, boring companions I've ever seen in an RPG. The only one I really liked was Sam Coe, and I think that's just because he's voiced by the same guy who played Adam Jensen in Deus Ex. Come on, say it.
I ain't asking again.
Oh, come on, Sam. Don't you mean I never asked for this?
I never asked for this.
The only interesting thing about Sarah is her British accent. And the booty. Otherwise, she's a Debbie Downer who's always complaining about her problems. Barrett has the most cringy dad humor, and he's always getting himself into wacky situations. Squeak! Andreja is a religious nutjob who always speaks in a monotone, deadpan kind of way. These characters just lack any significant personality or intrigue. Compare this to Fallout 4, which had a crack-smoking ghoul who dressed like a founding father and was the mayor of a major settlement. And every time you did drugs in front of him, he'd be like, "Hell yeah, brother." Or Nick Valentine, the synth detective with a heart of gold and the personality of a dead noir cop. Or a super mutant who took the writings of Shakespeare literally. To make matters even worse, the companion personal missions are some of the worst I've seen in an RPG. Sarah Morgan's and Sam's are relatively decent and interesting, but Barrett and Andreja's quests feel unfinished, like Bethesda slapped them together a few weeks before the game launched. Barrett's quest is all about building a court case to clear his dead husband's name for a past criminal conviction involving a shady mining company. Throughout the game, Barrett hits you up for money to help hire people to research the case. Then you finally get to meet the lawyer, do some boots-on-the-ground investigation, and visit the mine where the incident occurred. After turning in the evidence, the quest just ends abruptly. And later in the game, Barrett exposition dumps on you about the results of the trial. It feels like a crappy first draft of a short story for a high school English class that you'd hastily type up in 30 minutes the night before it's due. If you're gonna build a quest about an investigation and trial, it might help to actually involve us in the trial, kinda like Tally's loyalty mission in Mass Effect 2. Andreja's quest is even worse and feels like half of the content was cut. For this one, you need to locate 2 of her old friends that she abandoned during an attack 10 years prior. One of the guys ends up being dead, but we meet the other one on a ship out in space, where she reveals that she believes Andreja was a traitor who set them up for an attack by House Varun. But it turns out that Andreja's commander was actually working with some kind of rogue faction who set her and her friends up. So we go to confront her commander, and you can either kill the guy or spare him. And then nothing happens. If you spare him, Andreja's like, I'm gonna rat you out to the council. And he's like, no, I'm gonna rat you out to the council. And then the quest is just over. You also can't talk to Andreja's friend after that initial encounter, so there's no resolution there either. The whole thing just ends so abruptly that something must have been cut from the quest. This can't possibly be the whole thing as intended. Like many things in this game, Starfield's companions feel half-baked and far behind the times when compared to other RPGs, even their own past titles.
You may be wondering, just how big is this game? So we thought we'd take one last moment and show you.
If Overwatch 2 redefined the meaning of a sequel by releasing basically the same game, then Starfield has redefined the meaning of open world games by releasing a game that isn't open world. If a game's map is segmented into hundreds of different zones that require you to go through loading screens, is it even an open world game anymore? In the early 2000s and 2010s, Bethesda was on the cutting edge of open-world game design. But while these game worlds were far more open than anything we had seen before, the maps were still somewhat separated. Given the limitations of console hardware at the time, Bethesda had to segment their maps into different zones. For instance, in Fallout New Vegas, the zones of Freeside and New Vegas had to be segmented into different zones because the game would just crash on Xbox 360 without that separation. And pretty much any time you would enter a building or new city, you would have to go through a loading screen. The hardware simply wasn't powerful enough to render massive, seamless open worlds yet. But technology has come a long way since the early 2010s, and so has optimization. Other studios have discovered ways to create massive open worlds without segmenting the map. The Witcher 3 was one of the first games to pull this off in 2015. Sure, there are some areas that are segmented, like the Skellige Islands, White Orchard, Vizima, and some of the sewer zones, but for the most part, the entire map of Novigrad and Velen can be explored from end to end without ever going through a zone transition or loading screen, and this includes building interiors. Since then, there are plenty of other games that have achieved this as well, like Red Dead Redemption 2, Cyberpunk 2077, Horizon, Ghost of Tsushima, Assassin's Creed, and many more. Now you might be saying, but Dan, it isn't fair to compare these games to Starfield because Starfield allows you to travel to hundreds of different planets. You have to expect some degree of zone transitions when traveling between systems or landing on new planets. And that is a fair point, but this isn't the only place where the game is segmented. Even the city environments are heavily separated. Just look at Neon. The whole map is broken up into like a dozen different sections, all separated by loading screens. Even most of the shop interiors require you to go through a loading screen to walk into the shop. Why? The technological limitations of the Xbox 360 era are a thing of the past, but Bethesda is still designing their open worlds in the same segmented way they've been doing for over 10 years. Meanwhile, other open-world RPG developers are running laps around them. Gone are the days when Bethesda was the king of this genre, pushing the boundaries of what was possible from a world design perspective. And one of the most baffling decisions is the complete lack of a local map for the city environments. Why didn't they put maps in this game to help us locate shops and other locations in these zones? It's like they just completely forgot to do it or couldn't be bothered to create them. I guess the game really is no map sky.
Let's take a look at one of our planets, Jemison. You can land into Atlantis, but you can also land and explore anywhere on the planet. And it's not just this planet, it's all the planets in the system. And not just this system, but over 100 systems. Over 1,000 planets, all open for you to explore.
Exploration in Starfield is the worst it's ever been in a Bethesda game. Getting your boots on the ground and seeing what's out there in the game world has always been one of the main appeals of Bethesda games, but in Starfield there is simply nothing to find. There are hundreds of planets in this game, all with procedurally generated copy and paste content. so you'll find lots of rocks to scan, a few geographical anomalies, and maybe a pirate-based or civilian outpost.
Well, Captain, if you're looking for rocks, I think you found the perfect place to start.
But after you've landed on a few planets, you'll quickly realize that it's all basically the same. Soulless, empty, and uninteresting environments with nothing to do or see. The only places you'll find the good quest content are the handful of big cities and outposts in the game. In Fallout 4, whenever I saw a new map marker on my compass, my curiosity drove me to see what I would discover. Sometimes it would be nothing, just a few enemies and some random loot. But sometimes I would stumble upon a new quest, like a shady food vendor who was mixing human meat into his products, or a town where everyone is super friendly, but they're actually responsible for a recent kidnapping.
Are you certain about that?
Or even little events like seeing a super mutant surprise me at the Boston Public Garden, or a Mirelurk queen who made her home in the Massachusetts State House. The difference between this and Starfield is that all of the content I just mentioned was handcrafted by the developers. They designed these moments as a reward to players who ventured off the beaten path. When I see a map marker in the distance in Starfield, I'm not compelled to follow it at all, because I already know what I'll find. Procedurally generated, formulaic, boring content. What's the point of going through the same abandoned research station you've already seen dozens of times elsewhere in the game? If the developers didn't take the time filling out these areas with content, then why should I bother exploring it? I'm not usually the type of guy to say I told you so, but I told you so. I told you that these planets were going to be completely devoid of interesting content after the Xbox showcase in 2022. In the last few minutes, Todd wraps up by telling us how big Starfield's going to be. This is where my heart sank a little bit. There's apparently going to be over 1,000 explorable planets. As soon as I heard this, I immediately thought, so it's going to be quantity over quality, I see. Just a wild guess here, but I imagine the vast majority of these planets will not be worth exploring. Like, if it's going to be just a few procedurally generated buildings and Radiant quests, then that's going to wear out its welcome very fast. Starfield is much bigger than any of their previous games, aside from maybe Arena and Daggerfall, which were also procedurally generated. But achieving this massive scope came at a cost. The cost of worthwhile exploration, and the joy of discovering something new and interesting that a developer handcrafted for us to find.
We're back. You did not respond when I called to you after you pulled out the artifact. Does that mean Barrett's theory and experience were correct? The artifact grants the first person who touches it a vision?
The biggest factor contributing to Starfield's outdated feeling is the overall presentation of the content, particularly the character models, cutscenes, and animations. The character models in particular look really, really bad. I'm talking Mass Effect Andromeda levels of bad, and that game looked awful in 2017. The facial animations don't do us any favors either. When I see Sarah Morgan speak, all I can think is, my face is tired. Sarah's default expression is just so unsettling too. She has these crazy eyes and a gigantic frown on her face at all times. Go play pretty much any RPG or action game from the past decade. The Witcher 3, Baldur's Gate 3, Horizon, all these games are leaps and bounds ahead of Starfield when it comes to presentation. I'm not saying Bethesda needs to go out and mocap every character or conversation, but is this really the best they can do? With the exception of better lighting, Bethesda hasn't made any positive strides in how they present conversations to the player in the past decade. And in some areas, they're actually regressing. Let's look at camera angles, for instance. Every single conversation in this game has one camera angle. The character you are speaking to is put dead center in the frame, and the angle never changes. The only time the camera switches is if another character chimes into the conversation. And in the case of your companions, half of the time this bugs out anyway.
Say nothing and let their minds fill in the gaps.
As long as we aren't actually stuffed into the cargo hold with the rest of the crates.
Fallout 4 was by no means great at presenting conversations, but at least they changed up the camera angle from time to time. The issues in Jank don't end here though. If you start a conversation with an NPC while they're walking, sometimes it short-circuits their AI and they just keep walking instead of stopping to chat with you.
Did you see yourself? Those Sioka Syndicate freaks had no chance. Yannick came through. That asshole rescued his boy. Tell him I won't forget. We are tight.
Ah, didn't think we had any new miners on account of the positions being full up.
A similar thing happens if you start a conversation while an NPC has their back or side turned to the player. They're supposed to turn around and face you, but sometimes they just don't for some reason. I've also had a few instances of other NPCs bashing into me or the character I'm speaking to mid-conversation.
You're starting to grow on me, though. Like a fungus. But I like mushrooms. Guess that's the third thing.
These issues are specific to Bethesda games. Most other modern RPGs don't suffer from these kinds of problems. And most of these issues aren't new for Bethesda either. They existed in Skyrim and Fallout 4 as well, but Todd and crew haven't done anything to improve the way they handle dialogue in their games. One other thing that just kind of annoyed me about Starfield is that a lot of the NPCs are a complete asshole to you right off the bat for no reason.
Customer, feel free to spend your credits, or get the hell out now. Your pick.
Are you sure you're in the right place? You certainly don't look like one of our usual clientele.
Come on, give me a break. You're not exactly a top dog over there at the key, now are you? Sending me a rook to handle a job this risky is a goddamn insult.
Is this supposed to be some new form of Findom where you pay $100 to get humiliated by NPCs in a video game? The optional dialogue compounds this problem too. I'm the type of player who likes to explore every optional dialogue choice in RPGs. But for some reason, Bethesda crammed in a lot of questions that just repeat information that's already been presented to you. And when you select these options, the characters just insult you for not paying attention. Like, I know attention spans are shorter than ever, but do we really need half a dozen questions recapping information that was literally told to us seconds ago? There was one moment which really made me laugh during the Crimson Fleet questline. The whole plot revolves around recovering a marooned ship full of millions of credits, which the pirates call Crix's Legacy. And near the end of the questline, when you're just about to go recover all this money, you're given an option to ask the pirate leader what Crix's Legacy is.
Oh my god. Haven't you been paying attention? The only reason half the fleet's captains haven't scattered across the settled systems is because they're waiting for their part of the score. No money means no protection. No protection means we are done when C-Steph arrives. Simple enough for you?
Eventually, I just started skipping all the optional questions because in most cases they're completely redundant. You're not getting new information from most of this dialogue, just a recap of what you already know, layered on thick with a load of insults. Todd Howard boasted about this game having like 3 million lines of dialogue, but honestly, you could chuck 1 million or 2 of those lines in the garbage and the game would be unchanged.
Look at all of you, back from the underworld. Got pretty frantic on the comms towards the end there, but it sounded like this was a success.
Immersion is an incredibly important part of video games, particularly RPGs. There are many aspects that can contribute to immersion and make us get lost in the escapism or entertainment created by fictional media. Things like realistic graphics, animations, sound effects, storytelling, or just straight up fun and engaging gameplay can all build an immersive experience. And things that break immersion can be bad writing, bugs and glitches, janky gameplay mechanics, or other aspects of unbelievability. Is that even a word? Starfield can be a really immersive experience at times, but it always seems to trip over itself and rip me out of the experience eventually. For me, one of the big immersion breakers of Starfield is that the galaxy is populated with immortal humans. Many characters in this game are literally unkillable owing to Bethesda's now infamous protected NPCs mechanic, which has been in all their games since Oblivion. It's important to remember why Bethesda created this mechanic in the first place. When they released Morrowind in 2003, every NPC in the game was killable, including ones who were essential to the game's main story. If you murdered one of these characters, you'd be given a notification that basically said, "You just broke the main story. Maybe you want to reload a save." It was actually a lot more artful and creative in how they worded it. I think it was something like, "Reload a save or persist in the doomed world you have created." But some players didn't like that they could just break the main story by killing a random character. Especially if they didn't have a recent save to fall back on, it might cost them hours of progress, which always feels shitty. So when Bethesda made Oblivion, they marked some of the story-essential NPCs as protected NPCs. This made them unkillable, so players couldn't just break the main plot. But as time has gone on, Bethesda has just abused this mechanic in all their games, and in Starfield, it's the worst it's ever been. Basically, every single named character in the game is invincible, even if they aren't tied to any quest at all. Nothing says immersive universe like pumping hundreds of bullets into a guy to just watch him hunch over and be completely fine. Even in parts of the story where you become mortal enemies with a faction, oftentimes these characters are still invincible. The most egregious example is the Crimson Fleet questline. At the beginning of the quest, when you get arrested by UC Sysdef, you are given the option to attack Commander Akande when you meet him on the bridge. At first, I was like, awesome, some actual role-playing, some actual choices. This is really great. If I want to play as a criminal instead of a federal informant, Bethesda is giving me that choice. Except, they're not really. You can't actually kill Akande here. He's completely invincible. You can't kill Lieutenant Toft either. You can't even kill the random Indian lady, and I don't even think she's involved in any quests. So why are these NPCs invincible? Because if you were to kill them right now, then you wouldn't get the big ship battle and combat sequence at the end of the questline. Bethesda is just saying to us, these characters are invincible because we said so, and you can't kill them until we give you the okay. Again, this is a step backward from Fallout 4. You could kill the Railroad during your first meeting with them. You could waltz right up to Elder Maxon of the Brotherhood and remove him from this mortal realm. You could even kill Father the moment he came through the door. So why can't we kill UC Sysdef in this first encounter, even when we are explicitly given the option to attack them? I suspect the reason is Bethesda doesn't want to be bothered with coming up with an alternate outcome based on player choice. If you could kill Akande right here, right now, then they would have to create another NPC to take his place in the chain of command. Or they'd have to come up with an alternate reality where UC Sysdef doesn't attack the fleet at the end of the questline. But doing all of that takes a lot of extra work and imagination. It's much easier to just make the guy invincible instead, so the questline remains essentially unchanged. This is so antithetical to the core experience of RPGs, which are supposed to be about player choice making a difference. It's difficult to stay immersed or invested in a questline when you realize the choices are fake. And speaking of immersion breaking, let's talk about NPCs not reacting to threats or violence. If you point your gun at people, or even fire your gun in public, nobody cares or reacts at all, not even the police. However, if you steal a coffee cup in front of a guard, you're going straight to jail. This game also has a ton of unintuitive design choices when it comes to the UI and menus. For instance, you cannot access your companion's inventory from the standard menu screen. You have to start a conversation with them, select Let's Trade Gear, and then sort through their inventory. One problem with this is you can't start a conversation with them if you're already in combat. So I had one situation during the UC Vanguard questline where our group was being attacked by civilians who were getting mind controlled. Kind of like the colonists on Pharos in Mass Effect 1. You're encouraged to swap to EM weapons so that you can incapacitate the civilians, but since we were already in combat, I couldn't change Andresia's equipped weapon. So she just started gunning down civilians, and Hadrian got really mad at me in the ensuing conversation.
Yeah, what the hell happened back there, Captain? There's no excuse for using lethal force here. Or you could have used the EM gun like you were ordered. These are lives you're playing with here. so get your head in the game.
And it's like, yeah, I could have reloaded an earlier save and dismissed my companion or changed her inventory before we got into combat, but these are unnecessary workarounds to bad game design. There's no reason you shouldn't be able to access your companion's inventory from the same menu as your own. I mean, compare this to Baldur's Gate 3, where you can press one button and can instantly see all your companion's inventory on a single screen. And here's another thing. What the fuck were they thinking when they created the hacking minigame? It's like the developers had a meeting and were like, how can we make the hacking 10 times more tedious and time-consuming than any of our prior mechanics? And this is what they came up with. It just slows down the flow of exploration so much to open up a menu and then spend 15 to 30 seconds lining up these pins to unlock a door or crate, of which there are many of them in each location you visit in the game. And in many cases, the stuff that's locked up is complete garbage, like this master difficulty lock on Crix's legacy ship that contained the basic mining outfit you get at the very beginning of the game. Oh boy, better put this shit in Fort Knox, it's almost worth 500 credits. This one time I unlocked a weapon case that was just completely empty. What? There's nothing in here? Oh, come on, dude. At this point, if something is in a locked chest, I don't even bother with it. If I ever play this game again in the future, I'll install a mod that removes this minigame entirely. Before we move on to the conclusion, I just have one more example of how janky this game can be. One of the only choices in the game that made a tangible difference in my playthrough happened by complete accident. In Aquila City, you can pick up a side quest to help some guy get a new job. His family's fallen on hard times, but he thinks his wife's relative might be able to help him find work. The woman is a ship captain in the UC Vanguard, and when you meet her for the first time, she's under attack by Crimson Fleet pirates. At least, that's what's supposed to happen. However, if you joined the Crimson Fleet, then these ships will not be hostile when you arrive. Nothing happens. You can't talk to the UC Vanguard lady, nor dock at her ship. The quest is just broken.
Hello, stranger! We got pirates all over the damn board. Here to join the Good Times Express?
This isn't a bug either. It's just a complete oversight by Bethesda. When you join a hostile faction, your character is no longer marked as hostile, so that faction won't attack you anymore. But when Bethesda was designing this quest around a Crimson Fleet attack, they didn't consider the fact that the player could join the Crimson Fleet. So instead of a space battle, nothing happens. Starfield is just clown galaxy, bro. Maybe they will fix this quest in a future update, but I've played enough Bethesda games over the years to know that ain't gonna happen. Despite the overwhelmingly critical nature of this video, I did have a decently fun time playing Starfield. There were some pretty good side quests in the game, and I've been itching to play a new space game for a very long time, so Starfield scratched that itch. But when I see people calling this game a masterpiece or a 10 out of 10, I feel like I'm being gaslit. Starfield isn't a terrible game, but it ain't great either. It's just aight. At this point, I've seen pretty much everything there is to see in the game. I still have a few one-off side quests that I haven't finished, but I have really no desire to continue. So I think I'm just gonna bounce back to Baldur's Gate 3 for a little while until the Phantom Liberty expansion for Cyberpunk comes out. Anyway, I've ranted long enough about Starfield. I'll see you later in another YouTube video. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to Big Dan Gaming for more RPG videos, rants, etc. Big shout out to all the channel members for supporting my content. Until next time, this has been Big Dan. I should go.